Good morning again. It's still legitimately morning. I'm gonna lean on you. Happy Monday, happy NeoCon. Monday, am I right?
Yes.
Monday.
If you all did not see the Bob Weiss program, I'm super sorry, because you missed something really amazing. But make a note, catch it on the rewind, on the replay. Our panel this morning is going to do a bit of a follow-up to Bob's conversation. He had some really amazing things to tell us about experiential design, but he was also giving us a peek into the future of experience, of the design industry, of the evolution of the design professions. And we're all looking to take home a few clues that we can utilize about what the future can do for us and to us, and the future of place and placemaking. And if that's you, you're in the right place with the right people. This is IIDA's Collective Design live at NeoCon, Season 5, Episode 3. We're all Netflixy about it. And I'm Cheryl Durst. I'm the Executive Vice President and CEO of IIDA, and I'm super excited to be hosting this session because that means I just have to tee it up and then turn it over to these brilliant people, and I can sit and listen. IIDA is very focused on the future at this moment. Many of you have probably already heard earlier sessions and yesterday that we have announced our Certified Design Futurist program. It's going to create this new competency that designers already have. We're just helping you structure it a bit more, but this competency of strategic foresight. And this course will be just for design professionals and those of us in the design industry. And that brings me to the moderator of our panel this morning, Bryan, down there on the other end. Mark is a senior foresight manager at the Future Today Institute. He's IIDA's futurist in residence, and he's a designer. He specializes in the practice of research-backed foresight for the built environment, and he is our collaborator along with the Future Today Institute for our Certified Design Futures program. He is the absolute perfect person to lead us through conversation with this amazing panel. So I'll turn it over to Mark, who will introduce his panel. Thank you, and I know you all will enjoy this program.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, IIDA. Thank you to the Martin for NeoCon for having us here. I am very excited for this panel. I think we're about to have a very lively conversation. If some of our introduction conversations is any kind of clue, you're in for a treat. We're going to be talking about the future of experiences, which is something that is going to be very relevant. I think as designers, we are all futurists because what we do is we create something that doesn't exist today. What I'm seeing a lot of my research and a lot of my work is that experience is becoming much more relevant as a part of the selling tool, as part of the stories that we're telling, and it's becoming what our clients are really asking for. Now, the practice of experiential design itself has been around for many, many years, but it's being augmented, it's changing, and it's becoming much more relevant. And as I said, our clients are starting to ask more from us, and they want it at the front. If you were here for Bob's talk, he was talking a lot about things that we're talking about planting the ideas, making sure that we're inviting our guests or our end users inside and making them the star of the story. And it really got me thinking about how these interactive stories are something that it keeps space fresh. So Lauren and I were having a conversation last night about how we can make sure that spaces have longevity to them, that they're no longer just something that is a one and done, and how we can think about that going forward. And I think what you're going to hear in the next hour is really going to help set the tone for how we can think about longevity of our design practice going forward. And so with that, I'm going to introduce the honored guests that we've got here who are really the practitioners, who are the experts in bringing these stories to life. So with me today, I'm honored to say we've got, first of all, Lauren Rottet of Rottet Studios. Lauren actually just received IIDA's very first Icon Award yesterday, so let's give her a round of applause for that. So not only that, but Lauren Rottet is a highly accomplished architect, interior designer, furniture designer, and art curator with an extraordinary record of awards, publications, lectures, juries, and honors. She's the founding principal of Rottet Studio, an international architecture and interior design firm, and is the only woman in history to be elevated to fellow status by both the American Institute of Architects and the International Interior Design Association. She holds a title of Interior Design Hall of Fame. Yeah, round of applause for all of that, right?
Yeah.
I'm reading this because I couldn't memorize all of this. She holds the titles of Interior Design Hall of Fame, Interior Designer of the Year, Boutique Designs Designer of the Year, the Hospitality Design Platinum Circle inductee. Ms. Rottet's furniture and product designs have earned her 4 gold medals for Best of NeoCon and a Chicago Athenaeum Award. Her new furniture company, Rottet Collection, was introduced in 2017 and was met with rave reviews, garnering significant awards, introducing an Interior Design Best of the Year, including Interior Design Best of the Year. Rottet Studio is consistently ranked among the corporate and hospitality top 100 giants and recognized as one of the top 3 most admired design firms in the world by a jury of our peers. The firm has an extensive portfolio of corporate, hospitality, residential, and maritime projects for world's leading companies and brands, including Goldman Sachs, Disney, Viacom, the New York Stock Exchange, United Talent Agency, JMB, Four Seasons, Starwood, Marriott. I'm going very quickly through this. Among her colleagues, Ms. Rottet is known as an innovator and teacher and devoting significant time to the advancement of the profession of design and architecture. So welcome, Lauren.
Thank you.
We also have with us Dr. Upali Nanda. She is with HKS and University of Michigan. Dr. Upali Nanda is a Global Sector Director, Innovation, and EVP at HKS. Based in Detroit, Dr. Upali Nanda has extensive experience leading research projects in design practice with a focus on the impact of design on human health and perception. She completed 10 years as an executive director of Center for Advanced Design Research and Evaluation, or CADRA, the research arm of HKS, and teaches as the professor of practice at the Talbom School of Architecture and Urban Planning at the University of Michigan. I won't hold it against her. I live in Columbus, Ohio. Ooh. It's fine.
Ooh, this is never gonna work, Bryan. Oh.
Her work at the intersection of human perception, health, design, and outcomes is widely published, and in 2018, she was awarded the Architectural Record Women in Architecture Innovator Award. In 2019, she actually made the cover of Metropolis magazine as one of the women spearheading innovation in our field. The cover actually had her holding a 3D printed brain in her hand. Mm-hmm. So,
wow.
Welcome.
I had to say that because now you know where my brain went. There was no expectations from the talk.
Welcome, Dr. Upali Nanda. We also have with us Bryan Graham, who is the co-founder and creative director of Graham Design. Bryan is a designer, advocate, and advisor. Bryan offers a strategic approach in the design, development, and marketing of workplace furniture. Bryan is quoted as saying, "I'm an interior designer who has evolved into a furniture designer, and it informs everything that I do. While it's important to understand the object that I'm designing, it's even more vital to understand how it's going to be used. That's why planning is the foundation of everything that I do." Graham's design solutions have been recognized by the most prestigious organizations in the US, including the American Institute of Architects, the International Interior Design Association, the Industrial Design Society of America, the Chicago Athenaeum Museum of Architecture and Design, Good Design Awards, and the International Facilities Management Association. So welcome, Bryan.
Thank you.
And then last but certainly not least, we have Lori Mukoyama. She is with Gensler. And Lori is a global leader of Gensler's hospitality practice and the design director based in the firm's Chicago office. She has led numerous successful branding and interiors projects throughout her 20-plus years in the industry, playing an integral role in the design of some of the most successful and award-winning hospitality spaces across North America, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Lori's energetic approach to shaping aesthetic moves beyond form and function, interiors to incorporate brand strategy and consumer engagement tactics. She has partnered with a diverse portfolio of clients to champion the creation of experience-driven environments that deliver on their vision and goals, this influencing the business strategies of major corporations. So, welcome, Lori.
Thank you.
I would like to highlight something. As I was reading through everybody's tremendous bios, I was realizing that we're all approaching experiences in very different ways, which I think is going to be great for our discussion. We think about them from an engagement standpoint or just from the overall evolution of how the brain works and how we are integrating that into our practice. And so many of you have heard that we, as Cheryl just announced, that we have now are launching the Certified Design Futurist course that's going to be coming up here soon in the next year or so. And I think as we think about experiences, those stories, those narratives are really pushing for what we need to design and deliver for the future of those experiences. And so with that, I'm going to open it up with our first question, which is for everybody. I invite you all to just answer as you are led. And this is, again, just something that to kind of get us primed a little bit. I really want each of you to share a time or an example where you designed an experience or a story that was very intentional, that landed well with the client, and just explain a little bit more about that. So I will open it up to anybody, or I can voluntold somebody if necessary.
Voluntold?
Well, Bryan, you just voluntold yourself there, so.
Well, I think that I've always thought about experiences, but I've recently had to really think differently about an experience from a product perspective. So obviously you develop products to solve problems, right? And to me, products are the tactile realization of experience. They're the things that help close the deal in my mind, right? Because now, okay, I'm using something, this is working for me, and the experience is fulfilled. But recently, with an introduction for a new private office collection, I was challenged not with a design brief, but with an emotional brief. It was something where I had to first understand from an empathetic perspective what kind of feeling, what kind of emotion, what kind of desired outcome and experience did the products, undefined at that point, need to enable. And that was really different for me. And I really enjoyed that. And again, it just opened me up to something new and hopefully enriches my practice.
I really like that. I think it actually makes me think of something that Bob shared about we have at least 5 senses, if not more. And I would agree, I think we have more senses. And I think when you add the emotional side of it, it really adds to the depth of what we can provide in an experience.
Right. And the thing about it is it's a leap of faith, like all of design is, right? The thing that I'll get there later.
A teaser, apparently.
It's a teaser.
Yes.
We just worked on the DraftKings at Wrigley, and that was crazy because we had 3 clients. So we had the Cubs, which are fabulous and a foundation of the North Side. Then we had DraftKings coming to Chicago, so a big entity. And then we had my dad, because he's an avid Cubs fan. And so all, that weight of having the neighborhood experience your space was a big deal for us. But this was the first time I had the challenge of everybody had to have a visual great seat in the house to the screens. So that's never happened before, and the time that you were to be there had to be longer. So usually you go to a restaurant, you're like in and out, but this is the first time they said, we want you to stay long and come with friends. So it was a challenging experience.
Yeah, I think that time and place is becoming so much more, it is what we bring to the table of the value that people get out of space. And it's funny because I think when we all talk about office right now, we're trying to figure out how to get people to stay in an office or want to even be in an office. So it sounds like that was right up that alley too.
Yeah, I think so. I guess I've always loved to tell stories. In 5th grade, I wrote this whole book. I took slides, remember slides, and I did this whole thing, and I gave it to my teacher, and I spent ages on it. And she said, "It's amazing, but why did you do it?" And I thought, well, that's an odd response. But anyway, so the one that I think sticks out with me the most was my first hotel, the Surrey, Upper East Side, New York. First of all, it was historic, Beaux-Arts, Upper East Side. I'd never done a hotel. I had so many hotels ideas in my head. I'd been wanting to do one for years. And it was traditional. I'm contemporary. I'm a minimalist modernist. So I'm like, okay, lots of challenging things here. And so I honestly didn't know what to do with it. So I thought Upper East Side, Coco Chanel, I think she lived here. And then I pretended, then all of a sudden, it was Coco Chanel's pied a terre, and I imagined her coming in, she was beautifully dressed, she threw the mink over the sofa. And she said, "Take this to my room, I'm going to the bar." But we didn't have a bar. A bar wasn't in the program. So I'm like, oh my God.
You need a bar.
Coco needs a bar.
Right.
Yep. I I literally went in the next week and I told my client, we have to and I'd already done it. I rearranged the whole ground floor lobby. Danielle Ballou had the restaurant next door, so I thought he'll just run the bar. So that's what happened. And it was #1 hotel for 10 years in a row, Condé Nast and leisure, travel and leisure until COVID ended their land lease. But yeah, so it's the power of storytelling.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Lauren, I'm going to come to you in a minute after we get through the next couple questions, but I want to figure out how to put ourselves into that place because I think that can be challenging sometimes.
Yeah. And it's interesting, all the examples are about designing a story. I just watched the Coco Chanel biography, so that really resonates.
Was she in a bar?
Not yet, but she haven't met Lauren yet.
Maybe in the future she will.
Since we can make stories, thanks to Bob, I think in the future we have a story where Coco Chanel meets you. But I thought it might be interesting to also think about how we discover stories. And so my example is a little bit about discovering a story, and we call it the applesauce story. It's a really simple example of doing a hospital design. And hospital designs are very predictive, they're very planned. You start from a plan, you start putting things into it. It's prescriptive. We decided when we were doing this design that maybe it might be interesting to find out the story of the nurse. And we followed her around for 2 days, and we shadowed, we observed. And what was fascinating is we realized, and we'd been talking, right? We've been talking to the nurses, we've been talking to all the staff, and everyone was telling us, this is what we need, more space. More space. Has anyone heard that before?
Always.
Right?
Never.
What do we need? Never. Right? But we said, you know what? Why don't we, instead of having this conversation, let's do observation, let's do some lived experience. And we followed the nurses around. And what became known as the applesauce moment was we realized that in a single event of giving one medication, one nurse could work 1.2 miles. One medication, right? So you give the medicine, the patient takes it, throws up. You go to somewhere else to clean them up. You come back, you go somewhere else to get something for the new clothes. You come back. Then the patient needs ice, you go somewhere else, you come back. And then in the end, for the medication, they actually need applesauce. And for applesauce, they were walking half a mile. And no one had made the connection that it might be really interesting to have the meds and the applesauce and the supplies together. And it became the applesauce moment for the client because they were like, that's easy. It's like one tiny product that needs to be in the right place. Right. And we would have never had that applesauce moment if we hadn't discovered that story and lived the experience of the humans that we were designing for. And I think that's so important, the power of lived experience and understanding that experiencing and giving ourselves room to understand it. And that's my story.
Well, again, I think this makes me think about the future too, because what we are doing is thinking about this is the lived behavior today.
Absolutely.
What is the future lived behavior that we really need to be creating the change around?
And I will add to that, I love that you made the point because what we realized is humans are so adaptive that the reason that applesauce moment had never been discovered is no one had realized it was a problem.
Yes.
Because
so
you were
finding the
adapting to the
problems.
future, the present as it is.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, and I think that I've been having some conversations with some people that a lot of what we're doing is just being reactive to what is happening today versus being proactive about the future. And I think that's where these experiences, and I love this idea of discovering what does that experience need to be to make sure that we're being more proactive with the experiences that we're creating. So I'm going to shift to a second pop-up question or popcorn question where I want to talk about business strategy a little bit too, because it's great to be thinking inspirationally, but we need to also be thinking about we're all businesses. We're all here to maybe make a profit at some point. I'm curious if anybody has seen being able to take these ideas and generate these stories and designs and change the value proposition of what your client can bring to either the community, to the people that they're serving, or to just the end user in general. And Dr. Upali, Nanda, you kind of gave one a little bit there, but if there's any other thing that comes up in mind.
I swear, if you call me doctor one more time.
I'm trying to be Upali then. Upali.
Thank you. No, I appreciate the question, and I think we've actually learned, just working recently with the inclusive design team at Google, there's been a very beautiful definition of experience that they have provided us, which is experience design is a cohesive, a single creative strategy that brings all design disciplines together towards a business and a life outcome. And I find that very helpful in terms of thinking about experience as what is that experiential outcome you want at the end? Because the experiential outcome at the end is the business proposition. 100% of the time, any industry you look at, the experiential outcome is the business value proposition. And so it's been interesting for us to go more and more upstream and stop having the conversation with facilities, which is great, but they are not making the eventual decision about the business strategy, and to go upstream and say, what is the business of experience that you're actually in? Who is your client, the client's client, the client's client's client, which ends up being the end user? At the end, what is the experience? What are you trying to get to it? To be able to make a business case around what is the return on experience, not just return on investment, and then think through it saying, for this vision of the experience, this is what you need in terms of a strategy, operations, and place. And all of it ties up to experience. So it's become the single cohesive design strategy that ties all the different dots together. And that's been a big shift for us, because that means we have integrated teams where technologists and interior designers and urban planners and anthropologists and psychologists are one team designing experience, instead of dividing up into these false disciplines in some way, where you're told your scope of work is only this much. Don't think beyond it. We have limited ourselves by boxing ourselves into containers of our profession.
Yes.
It's a really exciting time now too, because when we're doing retail design, where it used to be just easy online, and we all know we have Amazon, but now it's about how to make those online platforms really three-dimensional and experiential. And it's taking that experience home with you and after it like lives on. So I think it's a really good time for us right now to be able to dream into what that experience should be a little bit more. We just designed Wayfair, which opened their first store, which we all know is online, but to actually walk in and touch and feel, but then have these larger than life towels or larger than life fixtures at your fingertips and touch everything. It's just totally different. And to see that it's really hard also, because we're used to just being able to click, click, click. So how is it click, 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 stay, stay, stay? You know, post, post, post.
Yes. Well, it makes me think again about the senses, right? What you're talking about is basically engaging the human senses in order to, that's the proposition, that's the value you're bringing to, in order to come to the brick and mortar space versus just having that online one screen sensory experience.
One more thing that's fun, instead of having to shop there, they actually have QR codes. So you can combine the experiences together, and which makes you think outside of the box. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It's now a new time to shop or a new time to go places.
Absolutely. Bryan, what about from a product standpoint? Have you seen a change in being able to bring stories to the, what the value proposition then becomes for your end users?
Yeah, I mean, we're always, I think, hopefully in the best sense, projecting out scenarios of use, right? And I think our industry, I hope I don't upset anybody here, but our industry is very focused on typicals and standards that are established, right? And those are fine and those work. But what about imagining the same space in a different scenario? And sometimes you have to go beyond what's asked for in the bid and sort of suggest to people, hey, what would it look like if it went like this? How would it work? And really do that. And I think that that's a compelling thing that's really fun to do. We have to do that up front to even get to the pieces that will then enable those experiences. The good thing about us, and I know you've done furniture design as well, is we get to mess up, and I just cleaned that up for the audience. We get to mess up with prototypes. I get to put things in front of people, and those poor people get to have to work in those spaces, and they're like, okay, this doesn't work. Have you thought of this? That's really not great. And we can iterate before you guys ever see it, right? So we're deep into the experience thing before we ever put it out for public consumption.
Yeah, I think that iteration process is going to become much more of a necessity, not only with product, but with of space too. We were having a conversation with Bob afterwards, and AI came up naturally, as it does, I think, in every conversation in 2024. And we were talking about how it allows us to iterate and how it allows us to like edit and how it allows us to then become the curator of, here are all the ideas. Then let's kind of what you're talking about, figure out which ones are problematic, and then let's solution down to what is the great experience that we really want to get to.
Well, I think it's interesting in product in general because, you know, you could say no one needs another chair. Do we really need another chair, right? So why another chair? Why another two? But truthfully, in this, you know, world of excess that we've been in, and so, you know, I realized about my own line, someone said you really need a story. People want to engage in the product. They want to think that what they have bought is more meaningful than they bought a chair. So I had this chair in my head for a long time. I don't know why. I just wanted to make it that had a wood frame and an acrylic seat and back, because I kind of knew that everyone says this, can I sit in it? And I'm like, well, of course you can. In fact, it's actually bulletproof because it's, you know, bulletproof thick acrylic. So you can stand on it, you could probably throw it, you can do anything with it. But the point was that you had to look at this chair and think, can I sit in it? You had to think about it. It had to engage you, and it does. And I think that there's so much stuff out there in the world, and it stays for 5 years or 2, and it gets thrown away, and you get another one, and that's just not sustainable. Talk about sustainable. So I think that if more product had real stories about what is it really and the why, then I think it would live longer, and we would add to that as opposed to throwing it away and doing more, right?
But don't you think, can I follow up a little bit?
Absolutely.
Okay. Lauren, may I call you Lauren?
No, I would like to be called Doctor.
Yeah. That's how we're rolling today. She's Dr.
New
Rottet.
designation. So,
I
Dr.
feel so.
Rottet.
Oh, wow, okay.
But I forgot what I was going to ask.
Well, while you ponder, I actually do have a question for Lauren. So we'll come back to Bryan's follow-up question. So, Lauren, in your practice, I've actually read and heard you say many times that design can be about embracing what it would be like to live in the environment in which the space is situated. Many people confuse experiential design with more technology infused, which it can be, but there are other dimensions that we should consider, other methodologies and tools and products that should help explore and fully leverage the power of the experience. So I'm curious, how do you start thinking about, how do you start placing yourself in that lived experience, kind of the very first story that you shared?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And, you know, because I do a lot of hotels, and the boutique hotels realized a long time ago that they could charge the same as a 5-star, maybe more, if the experience was about discovery and you had remembered the experience. So Brad Wilson, president of ACE, he was my client for the first hotel I did. He's brilliant at that, absolutely brilliant at it, if you think about what ACE has done to transform the hotel world. So, but it's not just, okay, I'm doing a hotel in Indianapolis, what's about, okay, well, they have this and they have, no. You have to, what are the sounds in the morning? Where's the sun coming from? Chicago used to smell like a chocolate factory. It doesn't anymore, unfortunately. It makes me sad. But what are the smells in Indianapolis? What are the things you pick up? And you have to go deep. You can't just Google a few little things. And once you go really deep like that, then you can start to write the story. And strangely, we do actually assign characters after the Coco thing, because I realized that I don't know everything, and I see it only my way and the way I see it. And so when you assign a character, then you have to research that character, and then you can see it the way they see it. And you can literally say, stage right, this is going to unfold, stage left, that's going to unfold, and in front of them, this is what's going to happen. And so you really research deeply, and I mean deeply. History, all of that. I always love to know, did something happen in 1814 on this site? You know, what's the real guts behind where I am, what I'm doing?
Well, it feels like what the story then becomes is it becomes kind of the historical marker, and it becomes the precedent for what people will take going forward and what they want to come there for as well.
Yeah.
So,
and it is about the senses. That was the other thing I was going to say. And which birds are chirping? Are the birds chirping? You know, those are all the senses that go in. It's not just what it looks like. It's what did you touch? What did you hear? What did you smell?
yes.
I love the muse. We do that as well, and now with AI, I know a big topic, but we are creating our own muse, which is really interesting. So instead of finding a photo on Pinterest, we're actually designing her. Yeah, and then designing her clothing or what she's going to, or you know what she's eating. So it's not that it's just a photo of somebody or a fictional person, but it's something that we're invested in.
So Lori, how do we live this day in and day out then? Because I feel like we as designers, we make a lot of decisions. I tell my husband all the time, I'm like, I'm not deciding what I'm having for dinner tonight because like I've made 1,000 decisions today. So we've got a ton of information. There's a ton of data that's out there. How can we make this a practice that doesn't feel like it's overwhelming or even bloating the front end of the project too?
You're right that you don't want to bloat it, but I think we have to all start on a singular spot. And we actually just did a pitch the other day. Can I tell you, the first 2 days we were just spinning. We're like, how about this? How about that? And it was just like what about? But then we stopped, we said, what is our story? And this is so bad that I'm saying we spun for 2 days. But when we came to that point and had points of view from different generations, which is also really key, not to just have it from a singular person, but a diversity of ages and people, we came to that singular moment, it was like aha, it was our applesauce. And I think that moment really, then every material, every piece, every design really does come as a singular vision. And then we're able to also not sell it, but really tell that story back out to our client. It was highly successful.
Do you think that you would have gotten there had you not had those 2 days?
Maybe not. Yes, I'd like to say that was part of our process. Good point.
Well, I think because I know that when I've done workshops, they build to something, right? You know, like your brain just has to get there. I'm sure, Upali.
Yes.
Now it's going to be a thing. Upali would probably agree with me on this. Like your brain just has to get there, right? Like sometimes you have to go through the process.
Absolutely. And I also really appreciate the point out about research. I think one of the examples I really appreciated when Bob was talking, you just mentioned it, but the prototyping of experience and trying it again and again and again, because people will actually experience it. And you have liability if it doesn't go, and then of course you have the risk that they won't come back. But you really have to test it. One of the tragedies of our profession is we don't get to prototype our experiences enough. So in some ways, we become in the business of representation than the business of experience. And we have to be in the business of experience where we are prototyping the actual experience, not just what its visual artifact looks like.
Correct. Yes.
And the research is key.
But maybe AI, which gets it's on everything, like on every cereal box, right? Low carb, AI. It gets a bad rap, I think. Because I kind of feel like it's this, it could be, if it's fed the right information and skewed the right way, a conceptual opening, a block busting. It sort of says, and I think maybe it was Bound, it talks about 5 scenarios could be 50 scenarios. Our job as designers, right, is to edit, right? To
Curate.
curate, to apply meaning. That's what we do, right? We say out of those hundreds of choices, out of all these different scenarios, these are the 6 things that we're going to base everything on.
And the 6 things that can be realized, because AI does not have 3-dimensional or sensory intelligence today.
Yes.
It's not placed. I mean, I ask this question all the time, like, raise your hand if you're nowhere. We're always somewhere, but it's so easy now for us to be in 2 places and be 2 people, and we have this digital physical reality that is trying to find convergence. I mean, that's the challenge of experience in our times, is we are living these different complex realities, and AI is very interesting because it is all about the visual representation of it, but the physical, visceral experience of it we are accountable for.
Right.
And that creates great opportunity for our field.
I'm so sorry.
No, go for it.
So for time also, we've become really amazing partners, as we all know we should and always have been with our material and our vendors today. So I think that partnership is even stronger now after the pandemic. We all love Material Bank, right? We all do, but they don't tell stories. So recently, I was at Maharam's showroom and they talked about the new artist, the new material, and why it's colorful. So I might have just been walking by and thought, oh, cool, rainbow of colors. But now I understood, oh, no, it's colorful because in his country, they actually only wear these colors. You don't wear black and white, so they're obviously not Chicago designers. But, and then that gave me a deeper story, so that when I'm actually specifying or using it, I can actually tell his story on, too. So that partnership seems very important for us as we're moving and quickly going forward in design.
Well, I think that comes down to trust, right? Being able to trust our partners as well. And Upali, I have a question for you. You and I were just at South by Southwest, and we had a very fascinating conversation about trust. How communities are having trouble trusting each other. I think clients have trouble sometimes trusting us as well. So with your research and your background, how can we think about developing experiences that either build trust, or how can we make sure that we create something that allows us to trust each other more?
Isn't that the million-dollar question?
Yes, it is. That's why I'm asking
That's
it
the
right now.
million-dollar
Yes.
question. Cheryl and I were having a conversation earlier about one of the biggest challenges today that has fragmented trust is we don't have a common lexicon. In the most inclusive issues of our times, we use exclusive language. We see words and new things where we're like, I don't know. And we might be all saying the same thing, but we don't feel it, and we don't feel like we're saying it together. The example of the blind man and the elephant is great, because I think that's what our language has done. It has divided us in some ways and made it territorial, saying, this is me, these are my words, this is my territory, stay away. And that has really reduced our collective agency as a field, and it has done tremendous damage. So I think to build experiences, we actually have to let go of our lexicon and be naive again and really say, hey, what I really want is to feel like this. Like I really want to feel like this, and then start from there and see where we get. It isn't that complicated. We've just made it really, really complicated. And as a researcher in practice, I think a lot of it is because we have become very super specialized and very territorial, and that's the first thing. I think in terms of just environments that build trust, I think the idea of transparency and choice, you were talking about the stories that products and environments have. In environmental psychology, there's a great word called affordances. Right? And affordances are great. Affordances are the quality of an environment and an object that a user perceives. It's not what your intent was. It's what the user perceives, and the fit between intent and percept. That's the opportunity. So I think in designing environments for trust, there has to be more and more co-design with the eventual end user and stakeholder. And that builds trust because you're bringing everybody together. So some of the answers I'm giving is it's not about the manifest, it's about the process that goes into the manifest. And then you can think about very specific things like line of sight, like full body experiences, like the trade-off between different senses. I talk a lot about the synesthetic of experience versus the aesthetic of appearance. And that's a key distinction. The brain is fundamentally plastic. It negotiates with itself. It says, oh, right now I'm going to pay attention to the music. And if I'm in a concert hall, I close my eyes. But if I'm in a visual treat, I open it up. I am constantly doing this choreography inside my brain of the senses. But if the only way I talk about it is through a visual artifact, then that's another level. So I think there's a trust when you bring your body back into the experience. And you build it through what we are living together, what we are doing together, and what we are saying together to each other.
Yes. I think the idea then is also we have to think about not only, again, today's users, but what is the future user experience as well.
Yep.
And then I think what I loved about you talking about bringing the community into it is essential and vital. And I think it's a change to our process. And I'm starting to hear some changes to our practice that may seem scary to people, because what we're talking about is an evolution of skill sets, as well as an evolution of design process, which sometimes we like to do, sometimes we don't like to do, because again, it can bloat the overall process. So let's maybe bring this to a more tactical level for just a second. Lori, I'm going to go to you and just ask you a quick question. People are maybe familiar with experiential design or creating experiences. What are some very quick, tactical ways that they could start this practice if they aren't doing this already right now?
One just quick piece of advice would be to definitely think of the future experience not just as one thing, but in multiple. So it could be this, it could be that, it could be something else, and letting our spaces start to grow with us. So instead of being so beholden to what a guest room is just today, it might be that now in the future, our desks want to face windows, right? They're not going to just be bolted to the wall so that people are working and living and traveling. So instead of us being so siloed, as you were saying, into just one job or one field, it's for us to really expand our way of thinking and expand what could happen is a possibility.
Yeah, so in the Foresight practice, as a little plug there, we call that uncertainties. So a lot of people, I mean, people just don't like dealing with uncertainties. Leadership definitely doesn't like dealing with uncertainties because it makes them very uncomfortable. And so what they often turn to is just trends and data, and they often just throw data at the problem versus then saying, no, let's actually sit and be okay with the uncertainties and ask what happens if multiple uncertainties occur at the same time. Because often what happens is you think about them acting in a silo, when we know that uncertainties don't actually act in a silo. They usually come together in multiple different ways. And that's why the future, when we think about it, actually looks like a cone. To your point, there's multiple eventualities that occur. So you do need that iterative process. You do need to be able to think through. But sometimes the simplest step, in my opinion, is just listing out what the uncertainties could be. So that way you have a record of what it is that you're trying to solve for, and it's a starting point to then think about, okay, have we asked ourselves all of these questions? And that can start to build a common lexicon that you can go through, maybe different types of projects. Maybe it's similar types of uncertainties in a sector. That could be a way that you could explore some uncertainties.
And to your point, we always do a day in the life of, so in a day in the life of Coco Chanel, but we always do that at the very beginning, sometimes even at the pitch stage, so that we are thinking of those possibilities and we're dreaming with you. And then you're able to infill with us too as a client, you know what, no, they're not going to the bar at night, they're going to the speakeasy, and then they're going to the rooftop.
Lauren, how about you from a hospitality standpoint? I think I'd be curious because you've talked about generating stories. What's the first step for creating connection in the places and spaces that you're creating, in hospitality or in some of your other projects as well?
Yeah, and I think by connection, you mean connection of the space to the person or connection of the people inside it?
Both, actually, yeah.
Well, you know, I think it's kind of an art and a science because, and you can learn a lot doing hotel lobbies because we began to call it alone together, right? So you're up in your room, you're traveling all the time, you're really tired of being by yourself, but you don't know anyone there. So you go down to the lobby and it looks kind of this way and you're like, I don't think so, I'm going back up to my room. So how do you make that space feel like, oh, well, I'm going to go over here and then I'm just going to watch and see what happens? And so it's almost kind of like nesting. You create little, banquettes are a great example of it. You can sit in a banquette, your back's against the wall, you're comfortable, you're safe, and yet you can observe what's going on and then it starts to look a little interesting, so then you scooch out over there. Another psychology, it's interesting, sometimes you look at floor plans and why are there so many 3-people tables? Well, there's 3-people tables because if there's a 2-top and you're by yourself, then clearly you don't have anyone. And if it's a 3-top and there's 3 people there, and then you're like, oh, well, one of those doesn't have a partner. And so it's this psychology that it's okay for me to be alone, right? Mm-hmm. So there's all sorts of things like that that go into it. Lighting is the number one thing, though, because if you think that, if you walk in and that lighting's like this, you're probably not, no, it needs to be for this, but you're probably not going to be comfortable. But if it's the kind of right lighting where you don't feel like you're being watched, but you can see others, then you're more comfortable. So there's a lot of psychology, actually, that goes into getting people to feel like they can go down to that lobby and communicate. And it's interesting, but we are bringing a lot of that into the office spaces because everyone's heard they need collaborative spaces and they need this and that. And they say, but no one ever uses them. And then I look at it and I'm like, well, people don't use this because of these reasons.
It's not functional. It actually, we've gotten to Bryan's point about typicals versus actually investigating the actual used behavior that is necessary in those spaces. Bryan, you work with a ton of different companies and manufacturers. How do you think that people should start to develop these types of skill sets or develop these abilities as they're thinking about creating experiences?
I'm going to say that we got to re-engage the empathy muscle.
How?
Slow down, right? Stop and observe. I think I get the best inspiration from salespeople and dealers who tell me that these are still problems that haven't been solved, right? And if you could just put yourself into the position of these people coming into these spaces and they want to plug something in or they want to be easy and all that stuff. And we've been working on it for years, for decades, and we still seem to miss the mark. That means to me, we got to get back in there, we got to observe, we got to empathize, right? And then we've got to scenario plan and visualize and then see, is that what we want to do?
How do you do that when sometimes there's multiple different types of users? Because, when you're trying to design for space, we're all trying to design so that it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. Do you have any tips or tricks for trying to make sure that you're putting yourself in as many different of those types of personas as possible?
I don't know if I have tips and tricks, because the thing that I've learned over the past few decades of doing this is I can only take what I do so far. The things that I design and we offer up have to be completed by the specifiers who imbue the materials and the textiles and everything and select the poles that respond to the piece or the feeling they want the space to have, right? They're the ones who take our pieces and imbue them with the elements that make the experience that they desire. So I'm almost a bit of a chameleon. I have to design a little bit in a kind of a neutrality and hope that I'm inspiring you folks to want to specify the products and do it to create the new experiences you're designing.
Awesome. So I told you all I wasn't going to throw any curveballs. I am going to throw a curveball at this point because I think I really want to get your perspective on this. I would love for each of you just to give me your thoughts on what the future experience should look like as we are engaging in place, space, or product. Because as we've heard Bob talk, as we've been talking about it, we've talked about making sure that we're putting ourselves into those user experiences. And I want to really think about what is the optimized way that we could think about what we want that to be. Is there a way that we could scenario it out? Is there a way that we could prototype it out? So that way we leave the people in this room with something aspirational to maybe shoot for. Bryan?
I'm going to throw out humor.
Okay.
I think being slightly irreverent and joking about certain situations, because it's obvious, I mean, everything's got a little bit of, fun and larceny to it, is a great conceptual blockbuster, because it opens people up to, oh, that's so funny, but you know what? That's kind of true. And if we did this and this, maybe that would be the outcome we got. So I just kind of feel like opening up and loosening up and communicating, to me, is what's going to lead us to those outcomes.
That's great. We all could use a little humor these days, I feel like.
I would say to use every crayon in your Crayola box, right? So in the beginning, someone said the other day, I'm starting out in Revit, it's just not really creating the results I'm looking for. I'm like, you started day one in Revit? Oh my God. So use right, whether it's like Bob was saying, the trace, whether it is your AI tool, whether it is your inspiration of your muse, like be open in the beginning to have every crayon out on the table.
What other tools do we need in the future?
I think as a mindset, I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I do think that as a mindset, we need to be open that it's not the tool as much as the creativity in our mind that's utilizing the tool.
I would say that one of the things we really need, we use the term omni-channel a lot nowadays, experience coming from all these different channels. We don't have the tools right now to really see integrated experience, to scenario test it with the technology, with the lighting, with not just what it's going to look like, but how it's going to be operated and how are people going to talk to you in there. And what is that? And you can scenario test multiple experiences and you can do it in multiple spans of time. I truly believe that the design problem of our time is the design of time. Like we messed that one up completely. But it's really interesting because some of your most intense experiences are intense because they're for short durations. I'll wait in line for 2 hours for a 3-minute experience. And it reframes my waiting. My waiting experience is reframed in certain ways because of that. Some of the things we design are multi-year experiences. And you have to think about, how do I design this that every day still feels new? But it is like, I want us to embrace as a profession the complexity of what we do. It is not easy because you have these amazing, intense experiences. You have the day-to-day, you have no control over who's going to come in and out of the environments for different times. You don't have full control over the experience. And now you have the digital physical convergence that I was talking about. So in some ways, we have all already become interface designers. We are designing interfaces, and the quality of that interface is changing constantly. So the tools we need is more visualization, immersialization. I even want a new word for visualization because visual has a visual bias inherently inbuilt into it. So what are those sensory experience tools to visualize these sensory scenarios that allow us to have some real intelligence, embodied intelligence. Maybe that's how I would put it. Instead of artificial intelligence, what's the embodied intelligence tools we need to be able to think of all these futures of amazing experiences, all the way from awe and joy and wonder to just feeling safe and secure.
Yeah, when you were talking, it made me think about sensorial liminality, almost being able to study the senses of the liminal spaces in between, right? Like,
Yep.
what are those lived pieces, and then how do they start building off of each other?
True.
You know, it's interesting listening to you all talk and all the things that we've talked about today, and trust was an interesting one because, you know, really to trust, it is a human interaction. You look in someone's eyes and then you start to build a trust. And our world of people we have to trust has become huge because we're online with so many people all over the world and the time zones. And do we trust them? Do we even know them? So it's interesting because, you know, if you had to say what would I hope the future would be, it would be I hope that you would care about your neighbor's property as much as yours, even if they don't want you to. And what I mean by that is, you know, and the importance of what we do, that our interiors, environment and all of that, but what about cities? What about roads? What about highways? What about neighborhoods? What about the whole world? And, you know, I live in Houston and there's no zoning. This neighbor doesn't care at all about that neighbor. It could be a high rise, it could be a one-story house. And you look at Houston, it's a mess. You look at Dallas, it's been so beautifully planned, and it's because they talk. The owners and the developers and the landowners, they all get together, and it's not like, well, my property. It's like, well, you know, if we all kind of pay to get this, you know, freeway over there and build this park, and it's resulted in an incredibly successful city, you know, who's getting in a lot of the big, I'm doing a big project there for a New York client who chose Dallas out of, you know, all the places in the world, as hot as it is. So I think that, you know, as much as we're trying to connect, we're getting more disparate because of the electronic thing and we're not interacting. And so I don't know, I'm kind of all over the map, but those are the things that kind of struck with me as
But
we
can
were
I
all
do a
talking.
plus one on what you just said?
Yes.
Because I think that is, again, in this room, the power of place, like reclaiming the power of place is so important. And I think to your point about the community, the relationship between a person and the planet is place. And one of the reasons we don't feel that relationship is we're all displaced in so many ways. So I love that that's this idea of design as a continuum that goes all the way from product to interior to architecture to
highways
urban.
and cities, yeah.
Right. And it goes all the way through, and we are one collective community about it.
And the impact that decisions make on that lived experience.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's kind of funny to me, Mark, because you know I'm a big Megatrends fan from a long, long time ago, right? Thank you. High tech, high touch, right? The more ethereal the digital world becomes, the more we desire that Newtonian, you know, tactile, personal
Point
thing.
counterpoint almost.
Right? And so here we are in these continually divergent paths, right? And we gotta we gotta interweave these things together.
That's where it becomes a tool, actually.
Right, but designers are great at taking all this disparate stuff and synthesizing that into, again, something that has meaning, right?
Yes.
So with that, I'd like to open it up because we are running out short on time, not to cut this great conversation short, but I'm sure there are many questions out there, or hopefully there are questions out there. If you have questions, we have people floating with some microphones. Just feel free to raise your hand and they'll come find you, and then just feel free to ask your question. We've got one up here.
Well, I'm glad we're looking forward rather than backward. And my interest in the future is from the handicap view. We don't want to be accommodated, and we want to be included. And a lot of my transition from being legally blind to coming back into action was the frustration knowing how much easier it would have been if designers had taken us into account, because when we are part of the planning, we make it better for everybody. So yes, I came from Houston, and we redesigned the curb cuts. And so and I'd like to share with you the importance of tactile, especially I'm a weaver, And there are scientific studies measuring activity in the brain, and the touch of a textile trumps everything. So involve the weavers, because the vision, your brain activity activates so much from our work. And I enjoy working with designers to envision that dynamic of people entering a workspace and being excited to get there every day.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think that goes to the conversation we were having about involving the community, making sure that we're getting diverse perspectives. And I think that that is a great point to make sure that the consideration is not only just maybe the end user that's going to be in this space, but people who are outside, who maybe have a different type of perspective, a diversity perspective that we can bring in that we haven't considered.
And I think that that's our global stewardship, because when we're working in different places, maybe there isn't an ADA code, right? You don't have to have this, but actually to share, my son was in a wheelchair for many months because he got hit by a car, and I never appreciated a good, smooth surface until I was putting carpet samples down to help him get into the bathroom. So until you have that lived experience, I mean, it's very hard to put your mind in the right place.
Absolutely, yes. I see a question here.
Hi, everyone. Lori, quick question for you. You talked about designing sports experiences in the beginning of the panel, and I wondered, is the experience of like a fan or an end user ever at odds with the experience of like the employee? And if so, like, what do you do to reconcile that, or did you have to redesign an experience when you found out it was at odds with the employee?
Oh, that's a really interesting one. It wasn't actually the employee that was going to be at odds. It was really the neighborhood at odds with the fans, because there's like this very loud energy and excitement that happens with any betting or alcohol or large groups, right? And then there's this is my community and my home and my place and my kids. So that's really where it came together. And so we try to do a couple things, which was make sure from the outside it had the right fabric back into the neighborhood, and even the sight lines weren't floor to ceiling, but were at more of a human scale, so it felt right in that community. And then from the inside out, we also tried to make sure that it was the right, back and forth through everybody. And then to your also point, the strategy of how far people had to walk. In that group, that is a big deal, even in terms of how you're standing behind the bar and it's not on concrete.
I'm envisioning the session, right, where there's the drunk Cub fan scenario.
I didn't say drunk. Okay,
Okay, I did.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Over here, yes. I can repeat it for you, yeah.
I'm just curious, the conversation seems to be more around sort of the generic experience of place. Do you foresee in the future experience taking on more of a personal aspect where it's like personalization of experience?
So the question, I'll repeat it so everybody can hear it. The question was, right now it feels like we're talking about experience as more generalized, but in the future, do we think it's going to become more personalized?
I love that question, and 100%. I think the idea of the digital and physical ecosystem is converging. That is what allows this unique personalization to happen. The idea that environments will be responsive, that an environment will recognize you and welcome you and be able to give you lighting that responds to you and change the lighting for someone else. And this shared relationship that can actually be fostered by the new technologies, I think is a huge, huge period part of it. So I appreciate the question, and I think that's where the risk is too, because as you get to hyper-personalization, it may be at the risk of your connection to community and to planet. And we are at this very interesting inflection point.
Agreed.
As a profession to balance those things out, because I can, if I have the buying power, go to an incredibly curated experience. And that curated experience may come at a societal cost that I really need to think through very carefully. But super exciting times, and thank you for bringing up that perspective.
I agree with that. I think the other thing that I would say to that is that what we should be thinking about in the future with that idea in mind is the relationship that we actually form with a more responsive type of space. meaning that it becomes more personal as it becomes personalized. So yes, we all have a relationship with like our bedrooms, or we have a relationship with places that have a historical memory to it. However, as we start to become, having this space be able to like provide us lighting, it almost becomes a friend aspect to us. And so that starts to change maybe what the story needs to be of how we talk about becoming friends with the places that we work, play, and live.
I do think that's a really interesting question. And like even in a restaurant, like I don't like loud music, right? But a lot of people do. So the inability for a restaurant to turn the music down over your table or to turn the lighting down or up over your table is ridiculous, right? So I think it's a really good one. Hotels or good hotels are starting to do that really, really well. If you take the time and fill out things about you, they will personalize your shampoos, they'll personalize your sheets, your towels, your lots of stuff for you, and your whole television selection. So the good hotels are really starting to understand that a room doesn't work for everyone and the same product doesn't work for everyone. So I think that's really important, because as much as we do all want to be the same and cohesive, and
That's a great experience. I'm just trying to get the make my own waffle thing.
well, good luck
We
with
are
that.
seeing that as a problem, because as technology advances and there's like 1,000 lights and you're like, which button am I pushing? Just give me one button.
Yes. Last question, I think, up here, and then I think we'll close this out.
Hi. Dr. Nanda mentioned displacement. I wanted to hear a little bit more about that. And then Bryan also mentioned, I think it was the place becoming so ethereal that we want more tactile influences. What I really wanted to ask the panel is, what are some of the driving forces for this thirst for experience? And do you foresee kind of like a crashing point or a tipping point where we just get tired of it all because we're just overstimulated, it's just too much, and we're not interested in it at all anymore?
I've been a student of human experience for 2 decades now, and I would say 100% yes. I think we are reaching that. I mean, think of how much we are paying to go be in nature away from it all. It's a little ridiculous.
There are prescriptions to like go be in nature, by the way.
They're prescriptions because we have distanced ourselves. We are yearning for something. But in nature, it's really interesting. It has complexity, but it has coherence. So if you look at the synthetic model, it's concurrence, congruence, and coherence. Things have to happen together. You can have multisensory. They have to connect to each other. And then it has to be coherent. There's a lack of coherence, which is why we are so cognitively exhausted all the time. Like the reason we took on brain health was because it's cognitive exhaustion. So I think we are, because we are stretching the limits and we're asking every sense to be in a different place. We didn't evolve like that over hundreds of centuries. So you're starting to see that tension between what the human mind can create and what the human mind can actually conceive and perceive. That tension is a beautiful tension that, again, creates an amazing opportunity for the field. So I think there will be, and I think you will have this craving for simplicity. Again, even as we can design hyper-complex environments. And those are the kind of debates and questions we need as a forum, and bring the technologists into the conversation. And that's why I was mentioning interface. So I love biophilia as an example of a really well-curated, multi-sensory, cross-sensory environment that has complexity, but has a coherence experience, and we are craving it. We're not able to fully recreate it in the environments we have, because I can attack all your different senses. My favorite example is Vegas. Vegas does a phenomenal job of deliberately distracting your senses, so you lose all sense of time.
And money.
And money. And it's very intentional. So there's a lot to unpack there. I'm so sorry we're out of time. I'm sorry.
Yes.
To
Well,
lean in on that.
thank you, panelists, for being a part of this fascinating conversation. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I think this is a genesis point. This is an inflection point where we should really start thinking about how we can turn the experiences and stories we should be creating into the value proposition for our industry in the future. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.